to start off with VMware vSphere client. The lab environment you will be using is a VMware ESXi server, also known as VMware vSphere. It's very much like VMware Workstation, but it actually has a lot more power than VMware Workstation. It is a server environment, and so the way you connect to it is with a client. The client is referred to as VMware vSphere. So to connect to it, bring up your vSphere client, find the IP address for the server, and put in the default username, and I will give you a password when it's time to start the lab. And so you're just going to connect into the server. And so when you first connect in, it looks like this. Somewhat similar to VMware Workstation. You have over here on this side, you've got the host, and if you expand it, it's got the resources it's referred to as, and within each of those resources, there are the VMs that are currently inside this machine. So all those resources are simply like a folder in Microsoft Windows. It's just a way to organize the machines that you have in there. So the way I have it organized right now, this is a networking class. I have it organized by, we'll talk about it, but the virtual switches. So the virtual switches are going to represent separate networks within our environment, and I just have them organized by the virtual switches. The next thing I want to look at is if we look at the summary tab. So the summary tab gives you some background information, some basic information about the server that's running. So, for example, this server is using 4-core CPU. It's actually, the CPU is this AMD CPU. It's got 4 sockets and 1 core per socket, etc., etc. It also tells us how much of the CPU resources we're using. So right now we're barely using CPU resources. There's no machines running inside it, so that makes sense. Likewise with memory, it has 8 gigs of memory per ESXi server, so we're currently using less than 1 gig, and that's just to run the hypervisor. Again, the next tab over is the virtual machines, and it just lists the different virtual machines we have. And it'll list their consumption of resources, so however much memory and so forth they're using. Resource allocation, again, this is looking at the resource allocation by pool and by the individual machines. And then the next thing, actually we'll jump over configuration for now, and we'll go to local users and groups. So you're gonna, for each individual on your team that's using this ESXi server, you're going to create a user account. Creating a user account is pretty simple. You simply click or right-click inside that the space in that window, and click Add User. Create a username or your login name. So let's say we create me. You can leave the user ID blank; it'll generate that, and then you're going to add a password. And you'll want to grant your user shell access. So that's so that you can log in remotely. You'll want to be able to log in remotely if you have to go into a lower level than the vSphere client. If you have to log in and say go in and administer the networking on your ESXi server or something, you'll need that remote access. So just select shell access and click OK. You could close this and go back in and try and log in, but what you'll find is you won't be able to log in because what you haven't done is given this user any permissions yet. So let's jump over to the permissions tab, and in the permissions tab you see the 3 previous users all have permissions. Right now your user has no permissions, doesn't exist in the permissions tab. So right click again add permission, find your user, add him, click OK, and now that user's right here, but the only role, the only permission they have is read only. So we're going to go over here to the read only, and we can give them no access, read only access for administrator. And within the administrator, we can limit specific administrator privileges for them. But since you are going to be administering any and every task on this server, then you're going to want to keep yourself with full privileges. So we're going to click OK, and now that user can actually log into this account or into this ESXi server and do whatever task. So let's go ahead and try that. Let's just exit out, bring up another ESXi client, add in the username that we just created, and we're logged in.
So the next thing we're going to look at is how to configure some networking in vSphere. The first lab is some of the tasks that you're going to be doing are networking, and they're probably going to be some of the most challenging tasks that you can do there. So what we're going to do is kind of walk through part of that lab and help you translate from the network diagram to the vSphere environment and be able to configure the devices that are in that vSphere server to implement that network diagram. So let's take a look at the network diagram. So here's the network diagram. It's a pretty basic network. We've got the cloud up here. The very first switch is that switch external. There's 3 hosts that are connected to it: router 1, VPN, and the web server. Then router 1 and the VPN are connected to the next layer down, which is network 10.0.0.0. Connected to that also will be a firewall, and then the firewall has 2 additional interfaces. One will be connected to DMZ, and the next will be connected to a network 10.1.0.0/16. That network 10.1.0.0/16 will have 1 host connected to it, which is going to be one of the interfaces on router 2. Second interface on router 2 will be connected to network 10.3.0.0/16, and then that will have 3 hosts connected to it: a SQL server, a domain controller, and Ubuntu machine. We have one other device that's in our environment, and that is another vAuto router with 3 NICs on it. We're not going to use that router right now, so we're going to connect it to parking lot switch, just so that it's not connected to anything. Now if we go back and we look at the server and we see what switches we have installed, you see that we have the external switch, we have 10.0.0.0/16, 10.1.0.0, 10.2.1, which is the DMZ, 10.3.0.0, and that's it. We don't have the switch that we're going to use to connect any interfaces that are excess. So what we're going to do is create a new switch. From the configuration tab, we go to add networking. We're going to add a virtual machine switch, create a new vSphere standard switch, and let's just call that parking lot. And you see that we can also do VLANs, so we can assign a new VLAN, but we're not using any VLANs right now, so we're just going to create a parking lot, and we finish it. Now if we look down here, we see that that parking lot is now added as one of our switch options. So let's do the first task. Let's take this 3 NIC router and connect it to that parking lot switch. So we just select the router, go to Edit Settings, and look at the network adapters. So the first network adapter, we're going to take it and connect it to the parking lot. The next one, same thing. And the third one, connected to the parking lot. Hit OK. And when we go back to our host and we look at that parking lot, now we see that that Viata 3 NIC is connected to the parking lot switch, and it's not connected to any of the other switches. Okay? Alright, so that's the first task. So now let's do something that's at least a little bit more interesting. Let's take a look at the external switch and the hosts that are connected to that. The very first one, router 1, so if we look at the external, external should be connected to the cloud, and which it is right here. It's connected to the actual Ethernet interface. And then it should have connected to it router 1, VPN 1, and web 1. So right now what we have connected to it is router 1, the VPN, and web 1. That's fine. Nothing to change there. The next the next network down is 10.0.0.0, and that should have router 1, the VPN, web 1, and one interface from the firewall. So if we look right now, that's got router 1, router 2. It should not have router 2. It's got the firewall. It's got the VPN. So the router 1, the firewall, and the VPN are fine. What we need to do is disconnect that router 2. We could try and figure out where the router 2 interface needs to go if it's anywhere, but instead of doing that, let's just go over here to that find router 2. There's router 2. Edit virtual machine settings. And we are looking at interface 10.0.0. Router 2 should not be connected to 10.0.0. So we're just going to take it and connect it to the parking lot for now. If we need to connect it somewhere else later, that's fine. But if we connect it to another interface, right now, just kind of guessing, we could later be going back and connect it to the parking lot or moving it around again. So for now, we're just going to connect it to the parking lot. And then we go back and check. And at 10.0.0, we now have router 1, the firewall, and the VPN. We would continue all the way through each of those networks until we're done, and then that's all there is to that task for now.